20 people were at that table. 20 adults who watched my mother yank a 10-year-old girl out of a chair, and not one of them moved a muscle. Not one. My name is David Mack. I'm 29 years old. I work in residential HVAC installation and repair in the Portland, Oregon metro area. The kind of job where you learn early that the thing that keeps a house livable isn't what's visible on the surface. It's what's running underneath. I've been a single father for 4 years. My daughter Lily is 10. She is the most deliberate, thoughtful, quietly brave person I have ever known, and she did not deserve what happened to her on December 25th, 2023, in my parents' dining room in Beaverton, Oregon. This story is not just about a chair. It's about the moment I understood that some families don't break down over time. They were broken to begin with, and some people just spend years refusing to see it. Let me give you the ground floor before we get to Christmas. My parents, my father, Glenn Mack, 58, and my mother, Patricia Mack, 56, have lived in the same 4-bedroom house on SWI Farmington Road in Beaverton since 1995. 30 years in the same neighborhood. Same church, same Christmas traditions, same dining room table that seats 10 on a good day and 18 if you pull in the folding chairs from the garage. They have 2 sons, me, David the younger one, born in 1994, and my brother, Ryan Mack, 33, the older one born in 1990. If you've ever been the second child in a family where the first one could do no wrong, you already understand most of what I'm about to tell you. Ryan is a project manager for a commercial construction firm. He's married to a woman named Tanya, 32. They have a son, Connor, who turned 8 in November 2023. Connor is a good kid. Genuinely, I want to be clear about that. He's funny, he's energetic, and he has absolutely no idea what his grandparents have been doing in his name for years. He is not the villain in this story. The adults around him are. I became a father at 19. Lily's mother, a woman named Jessica, left when Lily was 2 years old. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just gone in the way that some people go when the weight of a life they didn't plan for becomes more than they want to carry. I don't talk about Jessica much, and Lily doesn't ask much anymore. What she has is me, and what I've given her is everything I've got. For years, I told myself my parents' favoritism toward Connor was understandable. Ryan was older, more settled, more the son they'd imagined. Connor was their first grandchild. I told myself the gap would close as Lily got older, as they got to know her better, as she won them over the way she won everyone over, with her quiet attentiveness and her dry, perfectly timed humor that she absolutely got from me. The gap did not close. When Connor turned 6, my parents threw him a birthday party at Romp and Roll in Hillsboro. Bounce houses, catered food. 20 kids from his school. When Lily turned 7, they mailed her a gift card. When Connor got his first soccer trophy, my mother put it on the mantle in the living room, right next to the family photos. When Lily won the county-wide spelling bee in 4th grade, beating 43 other kids, my mother said, "That's sweet, honey," and changed the subject. I noticed. I didn't say anything. Not then. The word that kept surfacing, though, in conversations between my parents when they didn't know I was listening, in the way my mother introduced the grandkids to people at church, in comments that were never quite meant for my ears, was real. Real grandson. Real Brooks. Well, real Mac in our case. Real family. Connor was the real grandson. Lily was the one who came with me. And because I had spent 29 years absorbing the version of myself that my family had constructed, the younger one, the one who didn't quite land right, the one who became a dad too young and never quite caught up, I kept showing up to the holidays. I kept bringing Lily to the table where she was tolerated and not celebrated. I kept telling myself that family was worth the cost. The thing about costs you ignore is that they don't disappear, they compound. I didn't know, walking into that Christmas dinner on December 25th, 2023, that what I'd been paying would finally come due. All of it, at once, in front of everyone. The day started early. Lily had been up since 6:30, which was late for her on Christmas. She's the kind of kid who takes presents seriously. Not greedy, just thorough. She had made a list of what she was giving, not what she was getting, and she'd wrapped each thing herself with the concentrated focus of someone doing surgery. We drove the 12 miles from our apartment in the Aloha neighborhood of Beaverton to my parents' house on Farmington Road. I'd bought a bottle of wine for the table and a poinsettia for my mother. Lily had made my parents a framed photo collage, pictures from our visits over the past year, printed and arranged in a craft store frame. She decorated herself with gold paint and her own handwriting along the border. Family 2023. She'd spent 3 weekends on it. My mother accepted it at the door and set it on the bench in the entryway, without looking at it. I noticed. I filed it. The house smelled like pine and roasting ham. Ryan and Tanya were already there with Connor. My parents' neighbor Frank was there, along with his wife Lorraine. My Aunt June and her husband Phil drove up from Salem. My mother's friend Barbara from church. 3 of my parents' longtime neighborhood couples, the Hendersons, the Coopers, and the Garcias, and 2 cousins I hadn't seen since a wedding in 2021. 18 people, plus Ryan's family, plus me and Lily. 22 at the table, with the extended leaves and the folding chairs from the garage. My mother had put out place cards. That detail matters. She had thought about this in advance. Each card had a name in her handwriting, elegant cursive, the kind she used for the church bulletin announcements she volunteered to produce. I watched Lily walk around the table reading the cards, looking for her name. She found it. 3rd seat from the end of the long side, across from the Hendersons' teenage grandson, next to an empty folding chair. Not ideal, a folding chair rather than one of the proper dining chairs, but her name was there, and she settled into it with the quiet dignity of a kid who had learned not to expect too much. I should have watched more carefully. I didn't know what was coming. Connor arrived at the table about 10 minutes after Lily sat down. He circled around, found his place card, 2nd seat from the head, the high-backed chair with the cushion that my mother kept specifically for that spot, and then kept walking. Connor is 8 and curious, and something across the room had caught his attention. My mother came out of the kitchen 2 minutes later. She scanned the table. Her eyes stopped on Lily. Then she walked around the table. Fast. The kind of fast that doesn't leave room for interpretation. She grabbed Lily's arm, not her shoulder, not a gentle tap, her arm just above the elbow, and pulled. Lily didn't understand what was happening. Neither did I. For exactly 1 second. 1 second where my brain genuinely could not process what my eyes were seeing. My mother snapped, loud enough for the whole table to hear. That spot is for my real grandson. Out. Lily's foot caught the leg of the folding chair behind her. She went down. Her knee hit the hardwood floor. The room went completely quiet. 20 people. Not one of them moved. My father, Glenn, was at the head of the table. He looked at Lily on the floor, at the red mark already forming on her knee, at her face, which was doing that controlled thing that kids do when they're trying not to cry in front of strangers, and said evenly, like he was commenting on a weather forecast, "Just sit somewhere else, sweetheart." Sweetheart. I want to give you the exact experience of that moment, not as a narrative device, but because I think it's important to understand what happens inside a person in the space between watching their child hit the floor and deciding what to do about it. There was no anger. Not yet. What I felt was colder than anger. It was the sensation of something that had been accumulating for years, finally crystallizing into a single, unmistakable form. They are never going to change. This is who they are. And I brought my daughter here. I got up from my seat. I crossed to Lily. I helped her stand. She was shaking, not crying, not making a sound, just shaking the way you shake when you're 10 years old and your body doesn't know where to put the feeling. I brushed her dress off. I looked at her knee. Not broken, not bleeding, but bruised. I looked at my mother, who had already guided Connor to the vacated seat and was smoothing the back of his sweater. I looked at my father, who had picked up his napkin and laid it across his lap. I looked at my brother Ryan, who was studying his water glass. Then I looked around at every other adult in that room. The neighbors, the cousins, the church friend, the neighborhood couples, and not one of them held my gaze. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out my phone. I navigated to 3 saved text messages, one to my mother's number, one to my father's, one to my brother's, and I pressed send on all 3 simultaneously. Then I spoke, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Check your phone." My mother's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. My father's lit up in his breast pocket. Ryan's vibrated on the table. I picked up Lily's coat from the chair in the hallway, helped her into it, and walked to the front door. What was in those messages? Let me back up 9 days. Because Christmas didn't happen in a vacuum. Neither did what was in those texts. On December 16, 2023, I was at my parents' house helping my father replace a section of baseboard heating in the hallway. The kind of job he could have paid someone to do, but asked me because I work in HVAC, and because asking family is free. I was flat on my back under the heating register with a wrench when my mother came in from her home office and sat down at the kitchen table to take a phone call. She didn't realize I could hear her. The hallway connects directly to the kitchen, and the house was quiet. The call was with someone named Warren, who from context was a financial advisor or account manager of some kind. My mother's end of the conversation went like this. Yes, I want to do the same as last year. The contribution to Ryan's education account for Connor. Yes, same amount. No, just the one account David's daughter is not on the plan. A pause. No, she doesn't need to be. Another pause. Because she's not our family in that way. Ryan's son is our legacy. Let's keep it simple. I lay there under that baseboard for another 10 minutes without moving. Not because I was hiding, because I needed those 10 minutes to reassemble something inside me that had just broken into too many pieces to count quickly. Not our family in that way. Not our family. Lily had been coming to this house for 10 years, 10 Christmases, 10 Easters, 10 summers of weekend visits and backyard barbecues and church potlucks. She called these people Grandma and Grandpa because I had told her that was who they were. And behind the warm enough smiles and the adequate birthday cards, they had been quietly building a financial future for Connor. College savings I would eventually learn, plus a separate investment account my mother managed as custodian, while explicitly, deliberately, leaving Lily out. Not our family in that way. I finished the baseboard job. I said goodbye normally. I drove home. That evening, I called a family law attorney named Karen Ostrander, who had offices on S.W. Barber Boulevard in Portland. I'd found her through a colleague at my HVAC company who'd gone through a custody situation the year before. I described what I'd heard and asked a straightforward question. Did my parents have any legal obligation to treat Lily fairly? The short answer was no. Grandparents have no legal obligation to fund one grandchild over another. But Karen asked me a different question that turned out to be more relevant. Has your daughter ever been treated as a dependent on your parents' tax filings? The answer, it turned out, was yes. For 2 tax years, 2019 and 2020, when my income had dipped after a slow period at the HVAC firm, my parents had claimed Lily as a qualifying dependent relative on their joint return. They had received the associated tax credits. They had never mentioned it to me. They had simply done it. That was not legal. Claiming a dependent you are not supporting, and doing so without the biological parent's knowledge or consent, is tax fraud. The IRS defines it as a false or fraudulent claim. The penalty structure includes repayment of improperly claimed credits, plus interest, and, in intentional cases, civil or criminal penalty. Karen connected me with a tax attorney named Gerald Hooper, who worked out of the same building. Between December 16th and Christmas Day, Gerald and I worked through the documentation. My own returns for 2019 and 2020 confirmed I had not claimed Lily in those years, which I hadn't, because my income had been low enough that I hadn't filed jointly with anyone and hadn't flagged the dependent credit. My parents had stepped into that gap, quietly, without asking. The 3 texts I sent at the Christmas table contained 2 things: a copy of Gerald Hooper's formal notification letter to my parents, advising them that an IRS inquiry regarding improperly claimed dependent tax credits for tax years 2019 and 2000 had been initiated at my request, and a single line I had written myself. You said she's not your family. The IRS is going to be very interested in what you said she was in 2019 and 2020. Lily and I were in the car before anyone came out of the house. She was quiet in the passenger seat. She sits in the front now, 10 years old and tall enough that it feels right, with her coat still buttoned and her hands in her lap. The streetlights were coming on. It gets dark early in Portland in late December, and the neighborhood looked like a greeting card, all lit windows and holiday wreaths, peaceful from the outside. Your knee okay? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Yeah. A pause. It doesn't really hurt. I knew that was partly true and partly not. She's a stoic kid. Gets that from me, which means I know exactly what it costs her to say it. We drove for a few minutes without talking. I pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store on SW Canyon Road, so I could sit still for a moment without having to watch traffic. I'm sorry, I said, looking straight ahead. That should not have happened. None of it. She was quiet for a beat. Then, I knew she didn't like me. 3 words that landed like a stone dropped from a height. I turned and looked at her. She wasn't crying. She was looking out the windshield with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it my whole childhood. The expression of someone who has already processed a hurt and is now just being accurate about it. That is not your fault. Not any piece of it. I know. Another beat. I was just hoping I was wrong. 10 years old. She's 10 years old and she's been carrying this. I reached over and squeezed her hand. She let me. We sat in that parking lot for about 15 minutes while I got my breathing under control, and she watched a grocery cart roll slowly across the empty lot until it bumped a concrete barrier and stopped. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she asked finally. "Yeah," I said. "We can absolutely get hot chocolate." We found a Dutch Bros Coffee on SW Beaverton Hillsdale Highway. Portland people will know Dutch Bros, a drive-through coffee chain that started in Oregon. And we got 2 large hot chocolates and sat in the car with the heat running and drank them without talking much more about what had happened. Not because we were avoiding it, because sometimes the right thing to do immediately after something terrible is to be warm and quiet and let the person next to you know they're safe. That was December 25th, 2023. Christmas evening. My phone started ringing at 7:14 p.m. My mother. I let it ring. 7:31 p.m. My father. Let it ring. 8:02 p.m. Ryan. This one I almost answered, because Ryan and I have a complicated but not entirely ruined relationship. He's conflict avoidant in the way that some older siblings get when they've spent their whole lives watching one parent bulldoze and the other enable. But that night, I needed to talk to Gerald Hooper before I talked to any of them. I let it ring. I called Gerald from the parking lot of our apartment complex at 8:45 p.m. He answered, which tells you something about the kind of attorney he is. "They've had time to read the letter," Gerald told me. "I expect we'll hear from their representation within 48 hours if they're smart. Possibly sooner." What happens now? Now we wait and document. If they try to contact you to pressure you into withdrawing the inquiry, you forward me everything immediately. Don't engage directly about the tax matter. About your daughter's situation tonight. Do you have witnesses? 18 people. 22 at the table. Yes, I said. A lot of them. Good. Document what happened while it's fresh. Date, time, what was said, what you saw, who was present. I may recommend a civil attorney consult as well, depending on how this develops. After I got off the call with Gerald, I sat in the car for another 10 minutes and typed out a full account of what happened at that dining room table. Everything. My mother's words, my father's words, Lily's fall, who was present, what they did and didn't do. I sent it to myself by email, time-stamped at 9:06 p.m. on December 25th, 2023, and CC'd Gerald's office address. Documentation doesn't heal anything, but it does something almost as necessary. It makes the truth resistant to revision. My mother left a voicemail at 9:45 p.m. that I didn't listen to until the next morning. It lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. The first 2 minutes were about how I had embarrassed the family and overreacted. The third minute was about how Lily had misunderstood what happened, that Patricia had only been redirecting the seating arrangement and hadn't meant to startle her. The fourth minute dropped suddenly into something quieter, almost uncertain, which told me she had read the letter more carefully by then. The fourth minute ended with, "I don't know where you got that information, but there are things you don't understand about why that was handled the way it was. Call me back." Things I don't understand. I understood completely. My brother Ryan called the next morning, December 26th. I answered this time because Ryan is a separate case from our parents, and I owed him at least a conversation. He led with, "What did you send them, David?" "A letter from my attorney," A pause. About the taxes. Yes. How did you find out about that? Does it matter? Another pause. Longer. Mom's really upset. Dad barely slept. I let that sit for a second before answering. Ryan. Your nephew's wife, your nephew's mother, sat in that room last night and watched our mother pull a 10-year-old girl off a chair by her arm. Lily hit the floor. Your daughter, if you had a daughter, would have been that child. Where was I supposed to start? Silence. I'm not saying what Mom did was okay, he said finally. Then what are you saying? A longer silence. I don't know. I don't know what to say. That was the most honest thing Ryan said in the whole conversation. I respected it enough to keep talking to him, which I wasn't sure I was going to. I need you to understand, I said carefully, that I'm not doing this to burn the family down. I'm doing this because my daughter hit the floor at Christmas dinner, and nobody helped her up. And it turns out that same family, while they were deciding she wasn't their real granddaughter, was using her as a tax deduction. That's not something I can let go of. Ryan was quiet for a long time. Then, quietly, I didn't know about the tax thing. I believe you. What are you going to do? Let Gerald handle it. Keep Lily safe. See what they do next. My parents retained a tax attorney of their own within 72 hours. Gerald had predicted 48, but they must have needed the extra day to find someone willing to take the call on December 27th. Their attorney reached out to Gerald on December 28th, and the initial position was what Gerald had expected. A characterization of the dependent claims as an inadvertent error, a willingness to amend the returns, and a very carefully worded implication that pursuing the matter further would be disproportionate to the circumstances. Gerald's response was equally careful and considerably less sympathetic. The IRS doesn't consider deliberately claiming an unauthorized dependent an administrative error. The distinction matters. An error is a miscalculation. Claiming a child you have no legal or financial support relationship with, without the custodial parent's knowledge, for 2 consecutive tax years, is a pattern. Patterns attract different scrutiny than errors. My parents' attorney knew this. That's why the tone shifted considerably by the second communication, which arrived January 3, 2024. They were prepared to make full restitution of the improperly claimed credits, plus applicable interest, without requiring formal IRS proceedings, if I was willing to withdraw the inquiry and sign a mutual release. Gerald walked me through the numbers, the dependent care tax credit and the related deductions they had claimed over those 2 years, came to approximately $4,800 in combined federal tax benefit. With accrued interest, the restitution figure was $5,340. I told Gerald I'd think about the mutual release. Then I went home and looked at Lily's knee. The bruise had come up deep purple by December 26th. She hadn't complained about it once. She'd gone back to school after the holiday break, gone to her Tuesday-Thursday reading group at the Aloha Community Library on SW 158th Avenue, done her homework, helped me make dinner. She'd been, by every external measure, completely fine. Kids are extraordinary that way, and it is absolutely unfair that they have to be. I told Gerald, no mutual release. The restitution, yes, but I was not signing away the record of what happened. Their attorney pushed back. Gerald held firm. On January 11th, 2024, my parents transferred $5,340 to an account Gerald had set up for the purpose. No mutual release, no confidentiality clause. The record stayed intact. That same week, I took Lily to a therapist named Dr. Angela Reyes, who specialized in children and family trauma at a practice on NW Lovejoy Street in Portland's Pearl District. Not because Lily was visibly falling apart. She wasn't, but because I know from my own childhood that the damage from being told you don't belong in your own family tends to surface years later, in ways that are much harder to untangle after the fact. I wasn't going to let that happen to her. Dr. Reyes was direct, warm, and immediately clear about what she was seeing. Your daughter is resilient, she told me after the second session, but she's been managing a low-grade sense of being less than in that family for years. It hasn't broken her, but it's been a weight. The good news is she's aware of it. Kids who can name the feeling are much easier to help than kids who've buried it. What does she need? Consistency, safety, and for the adult in her life to keep doing exactly what you did, believing her, protecting her, and not apologizing for it. That was January 2024. I drove home from that appointment and sat in the parking garage for a while, the way you do when you need a moment before you can be okay again in front of your kid. Keep doing exactly what you did. Okay, I could do that. February 2024 arrived cold and wet, which in Portland means normal February. The month when the city goes gray and you either make peace with rain gear or you don't survive emotionally. My parents had not contacted me directly since the voicemail on Christmas night. Their attorney's communications went through Gerald. Ryan texted me occasionally, brief, neutral check-ins, the kind of messages that say I'm still here without committing to a position. I texted back in kind. Our relationship was suspended somewhere between before and after, waiting to find out which way it fell. On February 4th, my mother sent a card, a physical card, white envelope, her handwriting on the front. Inside, a printed card with a floral border and a verse about family and forgiveness. Below the verse, in her own hand, David, I want to talk. I think there are things that have been misunderstood. Can we sit down, for Lily's sake, if not ours? Mom, I want to be honest about how that card landed. There was a version of me, the younger version, the one who had spent his whole childhood adjusting himself to fit whatever shape the family needed, who felt the pull of it, the familiar tug of maybe this time, maybe if I just go and listen. I've learned to recognize that feeling now. It's not hope. It's the echo of conditioning. I put the card on the kitchen counter and left it there for 3 days, not to be dramatic, because I genuinely needed 3 days to decide what I wanted to do with it. On the 3rd day, I wrote back, not a card, an email, because I wanted a record. I told my mother that I was open to a conversation, but that the conversation needed to happen with a family mediator present, not over a kitchen table. I gave her the name of a family mediation service on SW Broadway in downtown Portland. I told her if she wanted to talk, she could schedule an appointment there. She did not respond for 2 weeks. Then, on February 20th, she scheduled the appointment. The mediation session was March 7th, 2024. My parents came together, Glenn and Patricia side by side, which told me something about how they had processed the last 10 weeks. Ryan did not come. He had told me beforehand that he didn't think it was his place, which I thought was both reasonable and convenient. The mediator was a man named Tom Adler, calm and methodical, who set the terms at the beginning of the session with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times and was not interested in theater. My mother spoke first. She had prepared. I could tell by the way she organized her sentences, the careful pacing, the occasional glance at a small notepad she had brought. She said that she regretted the way the seating situation had been handled, that she had not intended for Lily to fall, that the holiday had been more stressful than expected, and that she had reacted poorly. Tom Adler asked her to be more precise. You've described what happened as a reaction. Can you tell me what you said to your granddaughter? A pause. I told her the seat was for Connor. And what word did you use to describe Connor in relation to the seat? A longer pause. My father looked at the wall. I said, real grandson. Tom Adler wrote something down. And do you understand why that phrase would be harmful to Lily? Yes. In retrospect, not in the moment. My mother's jaw tightened. No, not in the moment. That was the most honest thing she said in the session, and I believe it was genuinely true. People who operate from a deep-seated hierarchy of worth rarely recognize the damage they're doing in real time. They're not performing cruelty. They actually don't see it. That's what makes it so hard to address and so important to name out loud. My father spoke less. What he said was quieter. A short acknowledgement that the way things had been handled at the holiday probably went too far, and that he understood why I had reacted the way I did. He did not mention the tax matter. Gerald had advised me not to bring it up in the session either, and I didn't. By the end of the session, we had not reconciled. That wasn't the goal. What we had done was documented, formally, through a third party, that the events of December 25th, 2023 had occurred as I described them, and that my parents acknowledged their role in them. Tom Adler summarized the session in writing, which both parties received copies of. That documentation mattered to me more than any apology. Apologies can be revised. A written mediation summary is harder to walk back. I want to step back from the story for a moment, because there's something here worth saying directly. A lot of people who tell stories like this, one focus on the revenge, the gotcha moment, the consequence landing, the satisfaction of watching someone face what they did. And I'm not going to pretend the Christmas table moment didn't feel like a door finally opening after years of being politely kept outside. But what I want you to understand is that the IRS letter and the tax restitution were not the point. They were a consequence of people who had been operating without accountability for a long time finally encountering some. That's different from revenge. Revenge is something you plan to hurt someone. What I did was respond to what was already true. The point, the thing that actually mattered, was the conversation in the parking lot of the Dutch Bros on Christmas night. The hot chocolate, the grocery cart rolling across the empty lot, Lily saying I knew she didn't like me with the quiet accuracy of a child who had been paying closer attention than any of us gave her credit for. She had been carrying that knowledge for years, and she had kept showing up anyway because I had told her that family was worth showing up for, and she trusted me. That's the part that sat heaviest, not what my parents did to me over a lifetime. What they did to a child who had done nothing wrong except be born to me instead of Ryan. There's an educational truth in this story that I think matters beyond the specific details of what happened to us, and it's this. When adults decide that a child belongs to a lesser category of family, whether based on biology, circumstances, or simply preference, they are not just making a seating decision, or a gift-giving decision, or a tax decision. They are participating in the formation of that child's understanding of their own worth. Children don't separate those things the way adults pretend to. To Lily, every time she was handed the smaller gift, the folding chair, the adequate birthday card, that was data. This is what you are worth to these people. Data that accumulates over years into a belief that is very hard to undo. Dr. Reyes said something to me in March that I've thought about almost every day since. The best thing you can do for your daughter, she told me, is not pretend the harm didn't happen. It's to respond to it in a way that shows her what it looks like when an adult actually protects a child. That's what those 3 texts were. Not revenge. Protection, delivered late, but not too late. The months that followed were quieter than the months that preceded them. My parents did not try to resume contact with Lily directly. An outcome I had made clear, through Tom Adler, was not something I was willing to allow in the near term. If they wanted a relationship with her, it would need to be rebuilt slowly, with appropriate boundaries, and on Lily's terms as she grew old enough to have terms. Dr. Reyes supported that framework. Tom Adler put it in writing. Ryan and I found our way back to something functional. Not close, not the relationship I wish we'd had, but honest in a way we hadn't been before. He came to Lily's school play in April. Her school, the William Walker Elementary School in Aloha, did a production of an adapted version of The Phantom Tollbooth, and Lily played a character called the Mathemagician's Assistant, which she prepared for with an intensity that frankly made me nervous for her teacher. Ryan sat in the auditorium and watched her perform, and afterward told her she was the best person in the show. He wasn't wrong. She wasn't the lead, but she was the best. That moment, Ryan choosing to show up on his own without being asked, was the beginning of something. I don't know yet what it becomes, but it started there. My parents eventually listed their house in Beaverton for sale, not because of anything related to our situation, but because the restitution payment and some other financial pressures had changed their calculations about the property. My mother told Ryan. Ryan told me. I did not feel triumphant about it. I felt something closer to tired. The specific exhaustion of watching a structure that was never as solid as it looked begin to quietly give way. I drive past SW Farmington Road sometimes, on jobs in the Beaverton area. The house sold in June 2024 to a young couple from Gresham who have, according to Ryan, already repainted the front door. I don't know what color. I don't need to know. Lily turns 11 in March 2025. She's in 5th grade. She has a best friend named Sophie, a bicycle she maintains better than most adults maintain their cars, and a series of opinions about video games that she will share with you at length if you make the mistake of asking. On the morning of her birthday this year, She came into the kitchen while I was making pancakes and stood at the counter and watched me work for a minute. Then she said, "Dad, do you think Grandma and Grandpa will send a card?" I flipped the pancake before I answered. "I don't know, bud." She thought about it. "It's okay if they don't." "Yeah? I mean," she paused in the way she does when she's working out exactly what she means. "I think some people love you the way they can, not the way you need. And that's sad for them. But it doesn't mean there's something wrong with me." She's 10, almost 11. She figured that out on her own. I put the spatula down and looked at her. "Where'd that come from?" She shrugged. "Dr. Reyes, also kind of me." I went around the counter and hugged her, and she let me for a respectable 5 seconds before she said, "The pancakes are going to burn." They weren't. But she was right to check. A key is a small thing. A chair is a small thing. A place card with a name on it is a small thing. But the accumulation of small things is how families tell their children who they are and what they're worth. And children are listening, always, carefully, more accurately than we realize, until the day they have the words to tell us what they heard. My daughter heard the wrong message for 10 years. On Christmas Day 2023, she heard something different. She heard her father stand up, walk across a dining room, and choose her over every uncomfortable conversation that might have followed. The hot chocolate helped too. I want to be fair about that. Keep protecting the children in your life. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. Show up for them so many times that the people who told them they don't belong eventually become the ones who have to explain themselves. That's the whole story. Except for the pancakes. Those were good. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.